I think a good place to start might be here. The November election has now passed. Mm-hmm. I get the sense that your office has sort of taken a collective exhale from a pretty stressful few months leading up, right?
I mean, for us, it was just about executing what we'd already done in 2020 and 2022 and 2024 in the primaries. We steadily were always improving the processes. They were always the best they could ever be, and they're coming in slightly better. And we're always looking at continuing improvement. But I guess you're right on the collective sigh. It was like we were waiting for crap to hit a fan somewhere, and it didn't. So your body's like, well, what happened? Is everything okay? Everything's fine. You check everything, and everything's okay. So that's kind of where everybody was. I was with some other elections officials from around the country, and they all kind of had that same collective, it worked. Everything was fine, and nobody freaked out.
Is that sense that you're describing, you think, partly a result of what happened in 2020?
Oh, absolutely. In 2020, it was unexpected. In 2022, in Georgia especially, we had a really successful election that ran really well. In 2024, the same claims are starting to come up again, regardless of evidence. So we were kind of prepared for all that. We got 2 different audits put together, tons of training, no lines, invested in better check-in devices, and again, we were taking all the steps to make sure everything went fast, and we worked with the legislature to pass a new law to let election results get out really quickly, because we've discovered the faster the results, the more likely they are to be believed. Now, I want them to be as accurate as you can, obviously, but speed, for whatever reason, this Amazon delivery age in 2 hours, we expect it to be done. So by 8 o'clock, we had everything from the early vote and the absentees that had been counted already reported, and that ended up being almost 70% of the vote.
I was watching a Frontline interview that you did. I think it aired in, February of this year, and you were responding to questions, and the interviewer said, what was it like going to the 2020 election for you as a voter? And you said, I supported Donald Trump, and I think the line you used was, and I probably voted for everybody else with an R next to their name going down the ballot. You said you've been a lifelong Republican. And yet you and your boss, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in this office became a target for a lot of conservative Republicans following the 2020 election. Did you have any moments there in that interim period where you thought, boy, I'm in an odd place here as a lifelong Republican to be the enemy of some folks?
Well, I'll take some issue with the term conservative, because a lot of people who are attacking us, I don't consider them to be conservative. Some of them were, some of them weren't. But remember, we went through a lot of the same crap in 2018 before we got into this office, when we had the Democrats claim the election was stolen. So we were better than some states, better prepared to deal with that kind of stuff. We didn't expect it to come from our team, obviously. And it was sort of surprising sometimes the level of vitriol that came from that. But I think there's a difference between people who are really, really passionate about it, and then there's like regular voters. And I think in 2022, when Secretary Raffensperger was reelected without a runoff in the primary by the Republican electorate, and then won the state of Georgia by the biggest margin of anybody running, that we felt pretty vindicated after that. So going into 2024, I think we felt like we had a really solid foundation of belief and support underneath us, and we had a really good election.
Talking about 2024, I think the last time you and I spoke was after a press conference here at the Capitol, a few months before the November election. And one of the topics we talked about was election security and the security of poll workers and election workers. On election night this year in November, there were a number of bomb threats that ended up being hoaxes mostly throughout Metro Atlanta, and I believe some other places around the state. What does that say about where we are as a state and as a country going into elections?
Well, the bad part is the low risk, high reward for somebody who wants to be a chaos agent. It takes an email and a phone to do some of these things. What worries me is we've sort of like attuned ourselves that this is just, people are going to make these kind of claims, and at some point somebody will actually put a real bomb out, and that's the issue you're going to run into. Like, I was talking to people from FBI and CISA, we're going to change some of our tabletop exercises to where somebody actually does take a drone and drop a pipe bomb on top of a building somewhere, because you're never going to see it, you're not going to know it's there, it's not going to be in the normal places dogs would go, and trying to figure these things out.
That's a real thing you're worried about now and tabletopping for.
Yeah, and tabletopping for, but I kind of take a longer view of it in some ways. People, I got gray hair and everything, but I was a child when this was happening. In the early 70s, there was a bombing a week in this country, and we all kind of accepted it. There was political bombing a week. Now we don't really have that. We have the threats of that. We have the misinformation and disinformation that is both domestically grown and then foreign grown. Like in the middle, I remember I was out with my niece and nephew trick-or-treating this year, and that was the same day they put out the Russians put out the video of the Haitians coming with IDs to go vote multiple times that we knew was crap, and we knew it was the Russians. So I'm literally out with my niece and nephew, tweeting saying this is not true. And that's kind of the environment you have to be in. You have to respond quickly and responsibly, knowing that there are going to be people out there trying to sow chaos. And we told everybody that, and we had actually had some discussions with some of the law enforcement agencies, and basically said nothing should interrupt voting until you have a really credible threat. But you do your steps to make sure everybody's safe. And some went way over the top because they don't want to be, if there is a bomb, I don't want anybody getting hurt. Other ones basically said, we're going to send the dogs around. We know it's not real more than likely, and it was fine. It's hard to gauge the level of risk that you want to take as a law enforcement officer, and we can't direct them. All we can say is we should do everything we can to never interrupt voting, because that is the goal of the chaos agent in this case.
And there was a lot of prep work that went in on the front end going into this November election. One of the things, we were anchoring many hours of live election coverage, as you do, and one of the things that was really striking on election night was seeing Fulton County law enforcement leaders come out and say, I don't want to say nonchalantly, that's not the right word, but almost standard business tone, saying, hey, we received a number of threats at these locations. They were quickly dealt with. As a result, these XYZ number of locations are going to be open for an additional 15, maybe 30 minutes.
Right.
I don't know. Let me put it to you as a question. Do you think that would have been almost a routine response, it felt like? Do you think it would have been the same 4, 8, 12 years ago?
It's hard to say. I think probably 4, 8, 12 years ago, we wouldn't have been as prepared to deal with it, knowing the rationale for people to do it. But I remember I read some of the initial ones. I'm like, well, this isn't real. I mean, you could get the language was put together, and it went to several places, and they never said polling location in any of the things, but all of them were polling locations. It was just, I don't want to call it ham-handed, but it was close to ham-handed. And I think law enforcement did as good a job as they possibly could to try to have it be as least disruptive as possible.
And I mean, would you call it mission accomplished? There weren't a lot of delays this year.
There were no delays, really, other than a couple of those situations. And the reality of it, one of the great things about having so much early voting and the ability to do mail-in voting if you want to, is 70% of the vote was cast. And since this was later in the day, at that point, probably 95% of the vote had already been cast statewide. So it takes some of those threats away. It's one of the really good security things that people don't think about is tactically the way we vote has taken away that threat. Because once you vote, it doesn't matter what those people do or say. And if you get the more and more people to do it that way, they have less and less impact on election day activities.
We spent a lot of time kind of talking about the lead up to November, what happened on the day of, on election day. Let's look future view now. What is next for the Secretary of State's office?
We're focusing always on continuous improvement. We work with the counties here in the state to try to make sure that all our processes are in place and they cleanly do things. And there's always places to clean up and do things, because especially in a state like Georgia with 159 counties, that some are large and wildly well-resourced and some are tiny and wildly under-resourced. And it's funny because the small ones can usually manage it. The big ones can usually manage it because they have so many resources. It's sort of that middle gauge where there's kind of a big population and not quite enough money. You want to make sure you have automated processes in place for them. But one of the things that really undermines people's faith in the election system in the country is not what happens in Georgia as much now, because recent polls show that 98% had a good voting experience, is what happens in other states. Like California, for instance, they were still counting as of last week. Arizona was late. Pennsylvania has a thing where they can't count their absentees until election day. So Secretary Raffensperger proposed a 5-point plan to kind of set some guardrails on a national level. The first one is something we do a lot of work on here in Georgia, which is citizenship verification. We want to make sure there's no non-citizens on the rolls. And we can work with the federal government and Department of Homeland Security, and they have access to a lot of data that there's legal and administrative hurdles right now to sharing that data. So we are trying to work with them to get that out of the way. It's one of the things we're requesting Congress to do. Another thing is to ban ballot harvesting nationwide, because there's sort of a hodgepodge right now. It's illegal in North Carolina. I mean, a guy went to prison for doing it in North Carolina, whereas in California, it's completely allowed and it's fine. It's illegal in Georgia, but there's a rational way to do it. Like if you're wife and your kids need to have their ballots delivered, or if your invalid parents need to have their ballots delivered, you should be able to do that. But putting anybody in between their vote and submitting their vote is a dangerous thing to allow. So we want to ban ballot harvesting nationwide.
It sounds like, and Gabe, I just want to underscore to make sure I'm understanding you and anybody watching understands you correctly. The language of the Georgia plan is to ban, quote unquote, ballot harvesting, but it sounds like what you're saying is in practice, the goal would be to allow for still folks who, elderly, senior citizens, folks like that, who can't physically get their ballot to the ballot box, they can still get help getting that ballot delivered, but it's...
You've got to have common sense on these things. Oftentimes what happens and what we get lawsuits over is like these very, deadpan, you can't do anything on this front. At that point, you're disenfranchising people, you're hurting. I don't think anybody argues if you have somebody who's hooked up in a wheelchair and medical devices, they should be allowed to have their ballot delivered. I don't think anybody's arguing that point. If your wife is working and you can take her ballot for her, I don't think anybody's arguing that point. But for the, like in California, they pay people to go door to door and collect these things. And who knows what's happening with them because that's out of the custody and control. And the Carter-Baker analysis from years ago basically said this kind of electioneering using absentee ballots is really the most insecure kind of voting that there is. And I think that undermines people's faith in the national experience, knowing that it's allowed in some places and obviously outlawed in others and may or may not be enforced. Another thing is photo ID. At this point, like in Georgia, we have 98.6% of our folks have their driver's license number attached to their voter record. The Help America Vote Act passed in 2002, became the law then, mandated that PII go onto voter registration lists, like a driver's license number, like the last four of a social or a full social.
PII being personal identifying information, just
Correct.
For someone who doesn't
right.
might not
Sorry,
know.
I didn't mean to throw the acronyms out there.
Please.
And it's already been in the law for over 20 years. So it makes sense to use that because in Georgia now we use photo ID for all forms of voting, absentee or early voting in person, absentee by mail, and election day. You can have to have your driver's license number or your driver's license or some kind of government ID that's defined under both federal and state law. So we can do that nationwide, and I think it's really the extremists now who argue against allowing for photo ID because nearly everybody has one. And in Georgia, even if you don't drive, you can get one for free, and we provide a very easy way to do that. Quick and accurate reporting of elections. Our law basically saying that all the early and absentee has to be reported by 8 p.m. is one of the best things to help increase confidence in elections. And we can do that nationwide. There's no need for these things trickling in for weeks at a time because you should be able to pre-process and do it securely across the country. And one of the other things that undermines people's faith is this ability for ballots to keep coming in, days and weeks after the election. That doesn't make any sense to people. So like in Georgia, if it's not in the hands of the election officials by 7 p.m. on election day, it doesn't count. There has to be a cutoff time.
UACAVA is the exception to that rule, is that correct?
UACAVA is the exception to the rule to having it in custody. There's two other things we have in Georgia law where you have a provisional ballot where it's in the custody of the elections official by then, and absentee where it's in the custody of the elections official already. The only thing outside of that is federal law, and even then I think we should probably talk to our federal partners and say there's a way to deal with our military and overseas voters using technology that will allow them to submit it much more quickly and not have to take, in some cases, the 9 weeks that they're providing for us to have runoffs. They say you have to have 9 weeks to do it. We got it down to 4 weeks now because of one way we've done the UACAVA using an instant runoff system for those handful of voters like that. But we actually piloted a program working with our military voters to be able to use their, everybody, military families has a ID card to go to the PX basically that they can scan and say, I am who I say I am, and using that to identify and then potentially return. There's been some experiments in West Virginia, some places where we're trying to figure out how to do ballot return that way, but it's technology. We want to make sure it's super secure. That's part of the reason we want to tie it back to that individualized QR code to identify those individuals. And the last thing is a clean voter list. Georgia has the cleanest voter lists in America. We invest in it. We invest dollars and time and effort constantly. And now it used to be a biannual process. Now we do it every year because of the windows of time we can do it in. But we need to, the National Voter Registration Act, also known as Motor Voter, was written in the 90s. It contemplates, wet signatures and mailing things and doing stuff, online didn't even occur to them. And we're not allowed to leverage technology. So we're finding ways in Georgia, like we just launched the cancellation portal, which is going to be great for when we find out, we do our cross-state mailings through our data exchange with other states, we can now give them a link saying, hey, if you move to another state, go to this link and you can cancel your registration. And we will have the PII identifying them the same way if they wanted to register online in the state. So there are people saying, well, we can't allow for that. I'm like, well, if you don't allow for them removing their registrations, you can't allow for them to then register, can you? Well, this is different. So we're trying to use the best practices securely to ensure we have clean lists and that people have faith in the outcomes of the elections.
Let me ask you a question that I know some folks watching this will have as they hear about the Georgia plan, and this is a plan that Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and yourself and your office are holding up on the national stage as sort of your view on a plan that other states around the country could and should adopt, right? That's the idea here?
Or at the federal level, because they're going to pass something at the federal level. One of the first things we want to do is make sure, do no harm. So that's the first thing out of the gate. Then, what can we do to really make things better? Because there's still an underlying angst amongst millions of voters that the system isn't quite right yet. Even though the outcome they wanted, it's still iffy. We want to find ways to, at this time when there is some belief in the system, let's put some guardrails in at the federal level and find best practices for other states to follow that can give everybody that level of confidence that the voters of Georgia have.
And there will certainly, surely be plenty of people around the country who see that plan and nod their heads and they say, yeah, I like what this sounds like. I'm pretty confident there will be others who read it and see things like voter ID requirements, an emphasis on keeping what some would call clean voter rolls, but others might call voter rolls that keep folks who should be allowed to vote off of them, and see these things as tools that have the potential to keep eligible voters away from the polls. What do you say to folks who raise those criticisms?
They're wrong. They were wrong in 2018 when they made those claims. I mean, look, the National Voter Registration Act requires list maintenance. You know how long it takes once we get somebody into the inactive status to get them off in Georgia, off the rolls?
How long?
It can be up to 8 years. I mean, so it's years of time. We publish the lists. We send 2 mailings saying, are you here anymore? I mean, it's one of the things in all the lawsuits we've had in Georgia, the judges have invariably said, it is so easy to register in this state that even if you are removed, you can register and get back on the rolls really quickly. But we haven't really had that problem. In fact, in nearly every lawsuit we had, the Stacey Abrams lawsuit that came in, by the time they got to the end of it, they had 0 evidence of anybody not being able to cast a vote the way they wanted to. They were down to one witness who could not remember if they actually requested a ballot or not. Out of the 50,000 affidavits they started with. This is the problem. Voter suppression and voter fraud are both fake, but they're really great at allowing people to throw bombs and raise money. And that's what comes out of those. And they both undermine people's faith in the system, and that they're both wrong. And you have elections officials and elections workers in all 50 states and the District of Columbia who fight every day to make sure every legal eligible voter has a right to easily vote, and making it really hard for bad actors to cheat. And that's across the board.
You raise these 2 things. You have voter suppression, fake. Voter fraud, fake. Your words.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who are Democrats, a lot of liberals who are very concerned about voter suppression. There are a lot of conservative Republicans, maybe MAGA Republicans, millions of them, who are concerned about voter fraud. You say that's fake too. Does that approach that you take put you a little bit on a political island?
Yeah, it's a political island with 90% of the Americans on it. So you can take the 5% over there and the 5% over there. I'd rather stick with the 90% who have common sense, who understand that if we're doing all these things, it's being done in a way to make sure that everybody's vote counts and that it's easy for them to vote. I mean, I think it'd be very hard to find a Republican or a Democrat, a MAGA person or a squad supporter who's going to be out there and say, wow, Georgia's really screwed up in elections, and in this 90%. Because they wouldn't stood in line for 2 minutes, they registered online, or they registered at the Department of Driver Services or DMV, whatever people are used to calling it, and they're on the rolls. The 98% of Georgians had a good voting experience. I mean, you can't get 98% of people to agree on what to have at Thanksgiving dinner. So I feel pretty good about what this office has done. And yes, there's always going to be loud claims from the right. There's going to be loud claims from the left. We're here to serve the voters, and the voters live in that 90-95% world, and they're pretty happy.
And that 98% figure, for my information, that's from a recent UGA post-election survey, right?
Correct.
Okay. I think this is a good place to end here. We're talking about, it's an interesting political moment in our country and in our state. You've been a prominent figure. You served in politics in the past. What is next for you?
The main thing is I got to focus on rebuilding my smoker at my house so I can do a brisket for the New Year's Day game, the Sugar Bowl with the University of Georgia facing either Indiana or Notre Dame. My money's on Notre Dame, who we never lost Notre Dame before. But I think you're asking me a bigger question, and you know, we've got a session to get through. We're still doing the post-election work we have to do. We have to fight for budget items to make sure we have good elections going forward, make sure they're fully funded. And that's what we're focusing on this office right now.
Gabe Sterling, thank you very much.
Thank you.